Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello, welcome to Andy Decodes the 12th Dimension. I am joined today by Gary Heseltine. Thank you for jumping on this with us. Hello to everyone on YouTube. Hello to people who are going to be listening to it on podcasts. I'll just do a quick bio for Gary and then we'll jump straight in. So, Gary was born in April 1960 in Scunthorpe, Lincolnshire, in the United Kingdom. He served in the Royal Air Force Police 1983 to 89 before spending an almost 24-year career in the British Transport Police 89 to 2013. He was also a detective for 19 years and an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses. So thank you, Gary, and nice of you to join.
Thank you for asking me. I just want to say after that introduction, I'm frightened stiff. It reminded me of Hammer House of Horror that was on a Friday night.
Oh, I love that. I stayed in that hotel where a lot of it was filmed down in Windsor.
Right. No, yeah, but I remember that as a kid.
The Oakley, if anyone knows of it.
Where?
The Oakley. It's between Slough and Windsor. They've got a golf course and all that, and it's all Gothic, and it's got the gargoyles and all that around the guttering.
I just remember the flashing black and white images in a sequence, in a montage, and the noises, and I thought it was very effective. So if I have to leave halfway through, you know it's going to need faster.
Oh, wait till you see the outro.
Heaven forbid.
Took forever to make them, tell you.
I bet it did. But yes, thank you for inviting me onto your show.
That's my pleasure. So, shall we, like we said off air, should we jump back to the very beginning at Rendlesham and tell us basically what happened?
Let me put it into context. The Rendlesham Forest case, in my opinion, is the most complicated UFO case story that's ever been in the subject, in my opinion, because there's so many people involved, so many different nights of activity, so many different incidents. So in a sense, it's not an easy case to explain quickly, but I'll do my best.
Thank you.
My reinvestigation has taken 5 years to write this book, which is obviously non-human, the Rendlesham Forest UFO incidents, 42 years of denial. And I've done it through the eyes of an experienced detective, stripping away sentimentality, people that I know, etc., etc. Just stick to the facts. That's what I wanted to do. 42 years on, I think the public deserve to have all the facts as best they can, and I think there's a lot of information that they don't have. But from the question that you originally asked, prior to my reinvestigation, which began in late 2017, the story was this: that there'd basically been 3 nights of UFO activity on a twin base US Air Force complex called RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. Think of 2 bases basically 4 miles apart, and in the middle between them was a forest, Rendlesham Forest, where a lot, not all, but a lot of the incidents take place. And so it's those twin bases. In terms of the twin bases, they were the top strike base in the United Kingdom. Don't forget, in late December 1980, when these events occurred, we're talking Cold War. It's pre the end of the Soviet Union, so 1980. At the time of the incident, and it's important to put this into context, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were massing on the Polish border because of the rise of the shipyard workers led by Lech Wałęsa, who went on to become the country's first president. And also in America, in the Middle East, there was high tension because of the Iranian hostage crisis, which was 52 Americans held by the Iranians. So you had the powder keg of the Middle East, and plus the threat of Soviet aggression. Now, what had happened historically when a country had tried to break away from the Soviet Union, the tanks had rolled in, the Soviet tanks would roll in, and they'd crushed the rebellion. And they'd done that in Hungary, and they'd also done it in Czechoslovakia in the past. So at the time of the incident, I think it's very relevant as to why UFOs show up, and we'll talk about this later. I think it's linked to the fact that at the time of the incident, there were 2 major world incidents, and the world was in a fairly dangerous place, or very dangerous place, possible Third World War scenario. Not a lot of people realize that. So we had 3 nights of UFO activity, which were the nights of Christmas night into Boxing Day, so 25th into the 26th, then the next night, which was the 26th into the 27th, and then it was popularly believed that there was just a final night, the 27th to the 28th. In terms of media exposure, it became a world famous case, the equivalent of it going viral in October of 1983. That's when it hit really the tabloid press and went around the world and became world famous. And that's as a result of a big article that appeared in the tabloid newspaper News of the World under the headline of UFO lands in Suffolk and it's official. And it was like a front page, double bait. There was lots of articles inside. So it was really a big deal. Most newspapers treated the subject very silly in the British media. So then there was this front page article, and they quoted from a document that was called what's now referred to as the Holt Memorandum. The Holt Memorandum was a single page document, and in effect it was exactly what it said it was. It was a memorandum sent by the deputy base commander at the time, called Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, and he sent it to the to Squadron Leader Morland, who was the RAF liaison officer for the twin bases, and he sent this 1 page to them because of a number of incidents that had taken place off base in the forest between the 2 bases. This is Rendlesham Forest. And what was really striking about that single page document is in the first of 3 paragraphs, it mentions that on what was considered the first night of the incident, therefore the 25th, Christmas night into Boxing Day, that there'd been a landed triangular craft approximately 3 meters by 3 meters found at or near the ground in a little clearing in Rendlesham Forest, and had been seen by at least, many people, but 2 or 3 people got close to it. Jim Penniston is the one that's well associated with that. He said that he was the closest. He walked around it, took photographs, touched it, made sketches in his notebook, etc.
Yeah.
Another person nearby, without a shadow of a doubt, was John Burroughs, an airman who was stood further back. He doesn't say that he saw a structured craft like Jim Penniston does, because he's a bit further back. His perception is different, and he would say that he saw like a bank of lights, and which suggests them, but because they're so bright, you can't see beyond the glare. You only get a kind of thing. And then, depending on who you believe, another airman that went out with them called Ed Cabanzak. Ed Cabanzak will say he too saw the landed object. Jim Penniston will say that during the walk through the forest to get to this point, that he'd used Ed Cabanzak as what's called a radio relay, because in the forest the radios were breaking up, and they wanted to use his radio to bounce from Jim Penniston's to Ed Cabanzak, and then Ed Cabanzak back to the control base.
Right. Yeah.
Security control, which is, as a former Royal Air Force police officer who did 6 years, and for 3 of those 6 years guarded tactical nuclear weapons on 2 nuclear weapons bases, one in Suffolk, actually, where this event occurs at RAF Honington. And then later, I was then posted to what was then West Germany, to a base called RAF Larbruck, and that was a nuclear base as well. So I did about 3 of my 6 years guarding tactical nuclear weapons, and in a sense, I did pretty much exactly the same job as the predominant number of people who were involved in the Rendlesham Forest incident. So I have a bit of a unique insight into what their role and duties would be, because they were very similar. So that was the standard thing. So that the memo said that there'd been an incident 2 nights earlier, on the 25th to the 26th. Nobody talked then, when this memo was released, about a second night, which we can come on to, because we now know what's happened to a young female officer called Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin. We'll come back to that, because that's an incredible story that emerges in the book for the very first time. And then what was the paragraph, the third paragraph in this memorandum, which has become referred to as the Holt Memorandum, was where Lieutenant Colonel Holt says that 2 nights later, he's told that UFOs are back in the forest, so he gathers a small team to go out into the forest to investigate. By the time he gets out into the forest, the UFO has gone, so he decides to do like a forensic search of the ground impressions that were found from 2 nights earlier, where this small object had landed. There were ground impressions. There were also broken branches of trees nearby, as if something had punctured punctured its way through the canopy of the trees to land and or take off. So that whilst they were doing that forensic search of the scene, an object is seen in the distance moving between the trees. They then start following this object through the trees, which they describe as like a red glowing sphere with a dark center, and it was described as like having a black eye winking at you. It appeared to be dripping molten metal. None was ever found. That they then followed it to what turned out to be a farmer's field, and when they first see it in the open for the first time, it's across approximately 250 meters across the farmer's field, and across the field, they're stood on the edge of the field looking across this open, what was then a grassed field, and in the distance they can see a farmhouse. And in the farmhouse, obviously there's glass windows, and the object was seen from retired as a Colonel Holt's perspective, as being to the left of the farmhouse, low to the ground, maybe 10, 15 feet off the ground. But it was that close to the farmhouse and casting so bright a glow, reddish glow, that it reflected into the windows, and it made it look like the farmhouse windows were on fire. So that was their reference point. Now then, when they see it out in the open, the object then silently divides from one object into 5 separate objects. So it goes from one object
Ah,
to divide into 5 white objects that then suddenly just disappear in front of them across the
yeah.
farmer's field. And then, believe it or not, they then see 2 objects moving in the sky to the north, one to the south, and they decide to cross over the farmer's field, across the grass field to the other side where the farmhouse was. And when they get beyond the farmhouse, they can see these lights a lot clearer. And basically, these lights are doing angular, like rectangle turns, squares in the sky, as if they're doing some kind of a grid pattern search. It's
Oh,
very
right. Yeah, yeah,
angular. So if you can imagine stop and then a right angle turn down, very
yeah,
precise angular movements, but at high speed. And then incredibly, Holt will say in what he recorded on a small dictaphone that he took with him during this effectively live night of UFO activity, and he'd been making intermittent recordings on the dictaphone to save writing it down.
yeah,
And at one point on the audio, he describes an object from the south coming towards him and his group at high speed, stopping directly above their heads at approximately 1 to 2,000 feet, and then shining what was akin to a laser beam of light, like a thin pencil beam of light, down close to their position within feet of where they were standing, which was in the middle of a field. And that light was seen approximately 15, 20 seconds. And he's
yeah.
wondering, is this a message? Is it a threat? Etc. And then suddenly the beam goes off, and then the UFO departs at high speed. He then, with the people that with him, also see uh, other objects moving and casting a beam down to the ground, which from their terrain was partially blocked by the terrain,
Yeah.
but they could see that beams of light were being projected down onto what looked like RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge.
Ah,
And we'll talk about that. So those were the 2 incidents that were really at the heart of the story by the time I began my reinvestigation in 2017.
right. Can I just ask a couple of questions?
Yep.
Right. So the one that was seen on like Christmas Day night going into Boxing Day, do you think that was the same object or UFO as the 5 that were seen and the red light, or do you think there was all different,
I think
completely
we're all
different?
different. We'll come and talk about that, because in the conclusions of my book,
Yeah,
I break it down evidentially,
yeah,
and if there's a break in between one incident, then
yeah,
it becomes another incident, because it's
yeah,
like, if you, let's think of it in this way. Imagine in the middle of the night, you hear somebody breaking a window downstairs in your house, a burglar, and
yeah,
you go down and you see someone wearing a blue jacket running out the front door carrying some jewelry out of the from your house,
yeah,
but you only get to see the back of them, yeah,
yeah,
and you give chase, and then they go around 2 corners and you've lost him. And you've lost him
yeah.
for the next 2 hours. You have only ever seen the back of that person. Then 2 hours later, you see someone hanging around, but he's wearing a similar coat, but you never saw his face. But this is 2 hours later. Can you be certain, as the person chasing, that that was the person you saw before? And the answer is
No,
no, because there's
no.
been a significant time break. Well, if
Yeah.
you think of that in the UFO terms, if one incident had stopped and then there's a significant time break, and then other people see different things, they're separate incidents. They're
Yeah.
not one incident. They might be all regarded as part of the whole incident,
The
but
bigger picture.
technically, yeah, the bigger picture, but in technical terms, they're all separate incidents. And at the end of my book, I highlight 17 different events that occurred at different times
Yeah.
over the late Christmas, December 1980 period, which is a lot. And you're probably only thinking in terms of two incidents: the first night landing, and obviously 2 nights later,
Yeah, yeah,
the whole tape. And this is a misnomer, and this is why I say in the conclusions of the book that the way the case is presented in the media, and especially the mainstream media, is the narrative is fundamentally flawed, because you're only thinking there's 2 nights of activity. Nobody talks about 3 nights, and as I've got with new testimony, I think it suggests heavily that there's now a 4th consecutive night of activity.
Ah.
Nobody talks about that now. I'm hoping that with the new information that I've unearthed for the book, which was a lot more than I thought I would get, that new re-interviews, military personnel, and new interviews with new witnesses, that there's a lot more to the case, and the narrative as the way it's been portrayed over the last 25 years, in my opinion, is fundamentally flawed. Basically, 4 people have controlled pretty much every documentary ever made in the English-speaking world, and that's Colonel Holt, Jim Penniston, John Burroughs, all the people that were effectively mentioned in the memorandum. And one other person, Nick Pope, the man from the ministry, who never, by the way, never ran any department. He was only 24 when he worked at the MOD UFO desk. Most people don't realise that. He was only 24 years old. He was a junior desk officer. He never ran anything. Nobody runs any MOD department at the age of 24. Vastly overstated. The book will devote a chapter to all the actual records pertaining to his role and letters that he sent out to people himself, where he said it was only 8 hours of his his weekly work. So 8 hours does not make you a top UFO expert.
Oh, no.
He was never a trained investigator. He was never any kind of top training and interview or anything like that. He never left the office, that kind of thing. But anyway, that's by the by. But he has become the top go-to guy, and he's in all the documentaries, so fair play to him. But in reality, those 4 people, Holt, Penniston, Burroughs, and Nick Pope, because of his powerful position within the media, have controlled the way the documentaries have been put together. What you've got to understand is, because the media basically don't understand the subject, because they have no interest in the subject, because for them it's just another story. Go make another documentary. And don't forget, for 70 years they've been led to believe there's nothing to the subject. It's comical, it's not really real. So they're not really trying to prove anything. They just make a pretty standardized show. They'll have a couple of witnesses on there, then they'll talk about skeptical explanations, and then the people are as confused as when they started watching the program. But that's deliberate. That I've been in many of those documentaries, and it's a deliberate ploy that the mainstream media have used, and it's wrong. They don't lie overtly, but what they do is indirectly lie by omission. They just don't give you all the information. They cherry pick the information. They put forward witnesses on camera that they want you to see, but don't talk about any of the other witnesses who've got very good stories, if not better stories, to tell. And that's how it's controlled. So, for example, many years ago, when Colonel Holt retired and then he was free to make documentaries, American film crews and film companies would go to him and say, "What witnesses do you want in this program?" Well, that wouldn't ordinarily happen to any other type of job. Can you imagine if you went to the Prime Minister and said, "Who do you want in this program that we're doing on Newsnight? Who do you want on?" It doesn't work like that. They're experts in their field. They've got political researchers who know politics inside out. But unfortunately, with UFOs, nobody is a good arbiter in the mainstream, because basically very few of them actually know anything. And I mean that literally. And it's proven when documentary researchers will ring me, and it's not their fault either, but they will ring me. There'll be a young researcher, and they'll say, and I'll say, "Do you know anything about the case?" And they'll say, "No, I've read a couple of little things." And basically that tells you that they're clueless. So that it's the blind leading the blind. So if you give somebody that license to say, "Who do you want in it?" and you want to control the case, you'll say, "I want him, him, and him."
Oh,
And that's how the narrative is controlled. And that narrative, in my opinion, needs to change, especially in light of all the people that I've spoken to, re-interviewed many military witnesses, got more information because of the way I've done it, used my enhanced training, and in a couple of interviews, major new sightings have come out, major new corroborations come out, which we can go on and talk about. But what I'm saying is the way the current case is, and the narrative, in my opinion, needs to change. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense, because, like you said, if they're picking and choosing who they want on and what they're going to talk about, they do have full control, and that's
effectively
it. Yeah. There's nothing anyone else can do about it, because there's nobody in that loop, only them.
Yep, correct. And because they were there, they've basically had a handle on every documentary more or less ever made.
Yeah, so it's like, we're not going to talk about that. You can say that. You're not going to mention any of this. He's not.
That's exactly how it is.
Yeah.
No, I don't like him, so I don't want him in it.
Yeah. He might say something, so
to upset
we'll
the apple
bin him off as well.
You've got it. You've got it. That's exactly how it is.
Thank you for that explanation. That makes so much more sense. But that makes a lot of sense on other stuff as well, not just Rendlesham. It's like across the board. So another thing to think about.
Absolutely.
Along with everything else.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Have you read my book?
Not yet. No.
Oh.
I will be doing. I promise. I've got a list of books. Well,
no. I know what it's like. I know what it's like, because people send me as the editor of UFO Truth Magazine. They're always sending me books, and it's squeezing them all in. But from your point of view, if you really want to delve down deep, you need to read the book and then make your own assessment of the book. Well, I mean, people have been really complimentary about it, saying it should become the definitive book. That's their words, not mine. But I think from your point of view, you need to read it to see what you think of it. You tell me.
There's another thing that we're going to be doing. You know, Chris Meat, you did a podcast with him a couple of months ago, Scottish Panorama. Me and him are going to do a book review once every 6 weeks on a Wednesday. So, if you don't mind, we'll throw your book in there.
Throw it in.
Have a read of it, and then we'll give you our honest opinion.
And that's all I ask for. That's all I ask for.
And it'll be put on StreamYard like this, so it'll be done live. So both me and Chris will have read it. We'll let people in the chat know what we're going to be reading, so that they can get the chance to have a look at it.
Yep.
Obviously, 6 weeks. That's 6 weeks is long enough to read a book, I think.
It is if you're making a point of reading it. Yeah. I'm very appreciative of that, and I've actually done it with a couple of other American shows where they do similar things. They review books, and in the end, all I've said is, please read the book. Tell me what you think. Be honest. What I would always ask is, people are constructive.
But it's a load of crap. I'm never.
Because that wouldn't be very nice, and I wouldn't do that.
Oh no.
But you read the book and tell me exactly what you think of it. And like I say, the reviews I've had from genuine people I've sent it to have been overwhelmingly excellent, and I'm humbled by their words, because these are top people. Like, I was very lucky to have Don Schmidt, who's the top Roswell expert in the world. He's done the foreword, and when I saw his foreword, I was almost moved to tears, because it was that positive. And he had no priming for that. I said, just, will you write one? And he said, yeah, I'll do it. And then I had no idea what he was going to write. And then when he read it, it was beautiful. And I was very flattered. So it's things like that.
Yeah. When you get the feedback like that, because I get the feedback from doing this as well, and people that I've interviewed, and they'll put something, even if it's just on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and you read it, it's like, you just overwhelmed by it. How nice and sincere these people are being.
Absolutely.
And it makes it worth you wanting to keep doing it, and not because there are people that say stuff and you think, what is it worth all this aggro for all this, like the snide comments and all that kind of stuff?
Well, the problem that you have in the social media world now is you have trolls, and for the position I took with the original military whistleblower Larry Warren, who's a very controversial character. He was always being attacked by the likes of Holt, Pennison and Burroughs, because his account didn't mention didn't marry with what they'd seen. But he was the original military whistleblower, and in I think 2015, 16, I started to be trolled by a certain group in the UK just because I'd said, look, I'd met Larry Warren a few times, and I think that his testimony, and I've read all his book and other books, he is telling the truth, in my opinion, as an advanced interview. Well, as soon as you went against this group, they then started to troll you, and they would be effing and blinding about you, and that's not. And they claimed that they were researchers, and that wasn't the case. But what you open, I liken the social media and the internet as being the Wild West. It's not regulated enough. And in general terms, a lot of people have been driven to suicide because of the way they've been, So there does need to be a lot of legislation. But in my opinion, I call them trolls because if you have to verbally attack somebody, you fat this or you effing that, then that's not an opinion. If you have to resort to verbal language like that, then you've lost the argument. If you've got something reason to say and it's a good skeptical argument, fine. But if somebody fundamentally says, well, I disagree with you, I agree to disagree, I can live with that and say, look, you don't have to agree with what I've written, just agree to disagree. But you be respectful of each other. But these people weren't. And so I was trolled very badly for about 3 or 4 years and still am. And amazingly, when the book came out onto Amazon, within a day or so, 3 of the main trolls, or 2 of the main trolls, went online and gave the book a review, a 1-star review, and started mouthing off at me. But unfortunately, the way Amazon is, you can't really get them down. So they're still on there, but obviously as time's gone on and the book's out there, so it's getting excellent reviews, 5-star reviews now, which is excellent.
The more better reviews, they're just going to get
Absolutely, but it just shows you it goes on, and that these are very bitter people. And the maddening thing is that these people wouldn't even apologize for their actions, because their argument was that this Larry Warren, the original military whistleblower, who'd said as early as late 1982 what had happened, that there'd been a landing which is not the one that Jim Penniston's linked to. This is another landing in the forest. And he wasn't sure about the date, but basically he had said that he was involved as a young airman, first base overseas tour, 19 years at the time, green as grass in terms of the military. He got taken into the forest and ends up, putting a long story short, going into a field where there is a strange coloured mist on the ground that seems to be hugging the ground in like a circular, he describes it as aspirin shaped, and there's a cordon around it. It's fixed in one position, this green glowing mist, and it's kind of circular, aspirin shaped, and there are US Air Force security police officers around it. And he said that he was ordered to go into the field and join that cordon around this mist, and then somebody says, here it comes. And then a red light, a small red sphere, comes from the direction of the sea and then stops over the yellow mist at about a height of 20 feet. There's an overwhelming bright flash of light. And when everybody's eyes readjust where the mist had been, there was then this shimmering, translucent craft on the ground, or at or near to the ground. Now, what's interesting about this is about 12 to 15 security police in this cordon. And he said that the incident was being filmed on 2 different types of camera, early video, and I've checked, there were early videos available to the US in 1980, so possible, and also cine film, which was movie cameras, the old cine film, 35 mil, or 70 mil, that kind of thing, right? So they were filming this incredible incident. And then what's even more bizarre is that at one point, senior officers turn up, including the base commander, Colonel Gordon Williams. He was the guy overall in charge of 12,000 personnel on the twin bases. And he goes into the field with a number of senior officers. And then an even more incredible, sounds like science fiction, the story was originally, as it came out in 1980, late 82, and then publicly in 83, was that something came away from the craft, the shimmering craft. and there was no windows, there was no doors, but something slipped off the fabric, and it was like a bubble. And then the
Right.
bubble separates into 3 separate bubbles. And then within each of the 3 bubbles was the upper torso of what we can only describe as the typical alien grey, but wearing some kind of upper clothing on the
Yeah.
upper part. Only could see. And these 3 bubbles with these upper torsos were floating a few feet off the ground close to the craft. And then the base commander, basically, in a silent face-off, is 10 feet away. And there's
Yeah.
this incredible. It's all, if you think of Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
Yeah.
it's
That's what I was
almost like that.
picturing when you were
Now,
saying it.
right now, this is conjuring up kind of like a science fiction setting. However, what's come through the book is major corroboration by another military witness called Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, who has been around for a long time, but was very reluctant to ever make a proper kind of statement on it. He's made the odd social media comment. He went on a radio show a couple of times, but never really
Yeah.
was asked anything in depth. Whereas I ended up having a 4.5 hour transatlantic phone call with him. And his testimony, he got really right into it.
Yeah.
He recalled a lot of new information. And he basically said that this incident with this Larry Warren, this controversial character who the trolls were attacking for saying he'd borrowed Adrian Bustinza's story. Actually, Adrian Bustinza said no, he was there and he was closer to the craft than I was. He was 10 feet from it, I was 20 feet from it. And yes,
Yeah.
it was being surrounded by security police officers. Yes, it was being filmed on cameras, moving cameras. And
Yeah.
2, the base commander, Colonel Williams, was there, which has always been denied. And he also
Right.
said that Colonel Holt, the one who wrote the memorandum, was also there. So this explosive new corroboration testimony, basically saying 2 of them side by side were in this field looking at exactly the same thing, and they almost describe it to a T. So this is military corroboration. So the
Yeah.
troll argument totally goes out the window. Yes, he was saying it. The only difference, what he was saying, was he didn't think it had happened on a 3rd night, what's called the Holt night, where he's gone out with his team and he's done his audio recordings. He says it was a 2nd consecutive night for him, which gives rise to the idea that there was a 4th successive consecutive night of activity. He said it was on another night and a 2nd night that Bustinza had been involved. But there you had it, all this debate all over the years, and all this really nastiness that arose was based on a lie, and people making 2 and 2 and making 5, and they really just ignored the evidence and just married it together to try to say that he borrowed the story. Well, there we are. We've got it from the horse's mouth. Somebody who was actually there, so that should be the end of the argument. Sergeant Adrian Bustinza has given a 4.5 hour transatlantic interview that was recorded on audio, and it's going to be in the documentary that will come, Capel Green. And I've also then went on to have a 75-minute Skype video, recorded on Skype video, interview that will, again, part of that will feature, I think, in Capel Green when that comes out, believed to be September, which is a documentary all about the case that I worked on initially for 3 years. It's now 6 years almost in post-production, but I've not worked on it for the last 2.5 years. So,
Right.
but that when that documentary comes out, it's got lots of incredible interviews, and it will have that audio in there where he's talking about Larry
Excellent.
Warren. So that's good. So it should
Yeah.
put that all to bed. But the trolls are never gonna
Yeah, they'll
say,
still
"Well,
be
I'm
there.
sorry." They'll still be there.
They'll
But what I'm
say it's
saying is,
fake
you know,
or
but the vast majority of normal people who are just decent people, when they read the book or give an opinion, they're very respectful, and
yeah.
so far it's pretty much 5 stars across the board. So I can't ask for anything better
Excellent.
than that, and I'm humbled by the reviews that I'm getting, both researchers and genuine people alike.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Right, we have got a few questions. Is that okay?
Of course, yeah.
Right. So I'll just work through them from top to bottom. So this is one from nickname Nicola. She would
Right,
like to
Nicola.
know what cases got Gary interested in this field besides Rendlesham, and why.
It stems from a childhood sighting that I had when I was 16 in my hometown. which was Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire.
Yeah.
And I'll very quickly say that I was walking my then girlfriend home, and as we did so, close to her home, we saw a bright white light, no distinct shape, moving from our position right to left at perhaps a 40, 50, 60 degree angle, not a high altitude. And it moved silently. We couldn't hear anything. And then as it moved past us, so we were then behind its flight path, it seemed to trigger a number of power cuts, grid failures,
Oh,
and
right.
all
Okay.
power went off. A bit like at the start of Close Encounters, where you've got Richard Dreyfuss in his truck, and he looks down on the city and sees a UFO over the city, and all the grid goes off one by one. It was a bit like that.
Yeah.
And I then had my cycle with me at the time. I dropped my girlfriend off at her house, which is in total darkness, the area. I then raced along on my bike. Cutting a long story short, I got home, and as I neared my home, I could see that the light was still on where I lived. So the object hadn't reached where I lived. And so I remember where I went from the darkness where the power was off to where the light was still on was on this bend. It was a left-hand bend.
Yeah.
And I remember looking over my right shoulder, and I realized that I'd managed to race ahead of the light because it was moving very, very slowly and silently. And I'd been racing like mad. And it was literally just behind me. So I went round 2 corners, Westdale Road, Baysdale Road, which is where I lived at number 3, and then dropped my bike outside. And I rushed inside to the front room, and my parents were having supper. And I said, coming outside, I think there's going to be a power cut caused by this strange light. And they just looked at me bemused, didn't get up. So I run through the hall, through the kitchen, out the back door, bottom of the semi-detached garden, turn around to look back at my house, just in time to see the object coming over my rooftop.
Wow.
How bizarre is that? Higher altitude. And for some reason, I do this. I'm at the bottom of the garden, and I remember clear as day putting my hand up like I'm answering a question in class, basically to make that straight line 90 degrees. And guess what? As soon as the object went beyond my fingers and I was now behind it, the whole area plunged into darkness. So that's crazy. How can I predict a power cut? And what it told me was that having moved to a second geographical position, perhaps 3/4 of a mile or a mile away from where I'd originally seen it, that light, whatever it was, had interacted with the electrical system and caused the power to go off. Because it's ridiculous for me to assume that I could predict a power cut. So that object triggered a power cut, in my opinion. And one of the weird things that got me into the research side, one of the very strange things that's happened that led me on this path to do what I do now, full time as it were, since 2013, was in 1976, after my sighting, we weren't even on the phone. So who do you report it to? People will laugh when they think they weren't on the phone because we live in a phone world now and mobile. But once on the phone, my parents just dismissed it as a coincidence. The nearest phone box was about 400 meters away around the corner. Who am I going to ring? Ghostbusters? It's ridiculous. So literally, there was nothing I could do, and the only thing that it did fire up was, what was that light? And I'd heard of the term flying saucer, UFO, but I'd not really got any interest whatsoever. But I had heard the terms, because pretty much everybody has. And all I could do in 1976 was go to my local bookshop, and amazingly, the very first book that I got turned out to be the catalyst that fired my, I think, interest in the subject. And it was written by what turns out to be one of the major heroes, in my opinion, of the entire subject, a guy called Major Donald Kehoe, American major. Served obviously in the military, had lots of military colleagues, and he was the founder of NICAP, the largest UFO organization in the 50s and 60s, and he wrote 5 books, 5 famous books, and his last book was new when I got it, and it was called Aliens from Space. And of all the thousands of books that I could have picked up first,
Yeah.
He was the first book that I got, and I've still got it. I'm still rereading it again now because it's
Yeah.
funny when you look back at things and how accurate it was. But
Yeah.
I got that book, and straight away I got a kind of validation moment because it basically said it referred to a case at one point, what was called the New York blackout in 1965 on the eastern seaboard, where
Yeah.
New York was effectively plunged into darkness to 6 to 8 hours. And cutting a long story short, it was rumored to be that UFOs had triggered the power box failures that sent the whole grid down, and people were stuck on
Yeah.
the subway, in lifts, etc. They even made a Hollywood film about it, but not about UFOs, but just about the fact that
Yeah.
people got
Yeah.
trapped for 8 hours. But yeah, so that was really the catalyst. I then went away, had a life, a couple of kids, served in the Air Force, left the Air Force, joined the police in 1989. Within 3 years, I was then started to do detective work, what was called an aid to CID, where you're just learning on the ground. You're not qualified yet. And then I qualified as a Home Office detective in 1995, and then I retired in 2013. But I'd been a detective for about 19 years. And I became an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses, and also was qualified for serious crime, to work on serious crime. So that's kind of where my background was. I didn't want to go higher because I didn't like the politics, and also if you went higher, say if I went to the next rank, detective sergeant, it then meant you were stuck behind a computer and you never went out hardly.
Right.
And I like to interview people. I like the psychology of interviewing. And so I like that interaction. So I prefer to stay at the DC, and I was a DC all the time. But if you think about it, every murder is solved by a DC. It's not solved by the likes of the DIs and the chief inspectors that you see on TV. The real hard work is done by DCs with some DSs, but it's usually the DCs that find the vital bits of evidence. And so that's what I was, an evidence gatherer. So in that sense, it served me good. So it served me well when I decided to do a book about Rendlesham. I never intended to write a book. I'd actually been researching the case privately. And then in 2007, I then got to meet Colonel Holt, retired, for a UFO documentary called UFO Hunters with Bill Burns. It was a series that ran for 3 series in the States. And they was doing a bit about my police cases that in 2002, I became known in the subject publicly when I felt the need to get involved in some kind of research. And I was trying to think, what can I do as a detective? Your time is precious, and sometimes if an incident happens, you don't go home basically for 2 or 3 or 4 days while you're gathering the evidence. So you couldn't be relied upon to say I'll be there every Tuesday or whatever. So it had to be something that worked around my job. And in the end, I had this idea, cutting a long story short, to create a database for UK police officers to report their sightings, and also collect historical sightings in books and magazines, and basically put it into one place. And that was called the Proof Force Police Database, which was launched in January 2002. So in a sense, now I've been a public researcher for 21 years. Now in 2023. But that's how I became known. People then started to say, well, will you tell us about your police cases and give us a lecture? Now, I'd never done any kind of public speaking or lecturing, but when I was asked to do it, I said, yeah, fair enough. And found, fortunately, that it was like duck to water. I found it very easy to stand in front of people now and speak, and that's just something that you're born with. I don't know where it comes from, but I knew most of my colleagues would run a mile if they had to stand in front of a TV camera or talk to 200 people. Well, it didn't bother me, and I guess I'm lucky in that respect. And I found that I could put things over, and then moving on internationally in 2010, Steve Bassett, who you might be aware of, the UFO lobbyist who runs an organization called Paradigm Research, PRG. He, in 2010, gave me what was called the Disclosure Award, which within the subject is like the World Disclosure Award. and very prestigious at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. I was very honoured. I had no idea I was getting it. I thought I was just going for a conference, and it turns out I was getting that award. But it was a very pleasant surprise. And then after that, I then started to do, or be asked to do international lectures. And here we are, 13 years later, I've now lectured in 22 countries. So I feel extremely lucky to have had the life that I've had in a subject that I'm really passionate about. So going back, that's just filling in the gaps as to why I should write the book. So when the documentary was taking a lot longer because it had grown out of all its original idea. Original idea was to make, a film within a year, and do specifically to make it around the original military whistleblower story, Larry Warren. And then we decided to expand it to the whole case, which then meant bringing in all the other people and then interviewing lots more people and doing the documentary is going to be a lot different because it's going to give you unique perspective of aerial footage of the forest that you've never had. It will give you precise locations. It will give you so much new information, and there's lots of brilliant interviews in there. And as I say, I was the lead researcher for the first 2.5 years. So I know there's a lot of good stuff, and there's over 70 hours of material, and that's why it's taking so long. But because I never signed up for that, in a sense. And when I started I would do my interviews and then say to the director, this is a good person to speak, and then you do it on camera for the film. But I'd already done my private research. And so when I got this really good interviews with Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, I did that on my own. It was this 4.5-hour transatlantic call that happened all the way through the night. So imagine you start a radio show at 1 o'clock in the morning, then you're going through till the early hours, 5, 6 in the morning. By then, your body is naturally wanting to close down because you're physically tired. So I was shattered by the end of it. But his testimony was extraordinary, and I still say it to this day that it's the most important interview I've ever done because of who he was and the very vital linking role that he had to the whole story. Was the person that validated this second landing, which had been so demonized by the likes of Colonel Holt, because Colonel Holt said, no, there wasn't a second landing. Sergeant Adrian Bustinza said he was there. Adrian Bustinza said Colonel Williams, the base commander, is there. And Holt was saying, no, ever since he's retired, no, Colonel Williams wasn't there, I wasn't there, there wasn't a second landing. And it's like, all talk of aliens is stupid, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not. Now we have this extraordinary testimony that's corroborating this. Adrian Bustinza will corroborate that he saw, with the second landing, he saw what he described. He finds it very difficult to talk about the entities or whatever. And he liked to call them silhouettes of some kind of life form. But something was there. Something came out, and he will describe it as silhouettes. But he has also another incident that's on the Holt night, the third night, where there's a good chance he was abducted. He will say that when Holt had gone out with his team and they come back 4.5 hours later, that John Burroughs, who was one of the witnesses to the first night landing, was there. He'd come in off duty. He lived in Ipswich. He'd managed to get a lift to the base. He just had something in his water, as it were, that he felt something was going on, and he managed to get a lift out to the forest. He wasn't allowed to join up with Holt's group, so he waited in an area, what's called the staging area. It's where all the vehicles had to stop because they couldn't go any further into the forest. So it was like a meeting place where all the vehicles and lots of people were milling around waiting for further instruction. And he was waiting there. And when Holt's team came back, he immediately went to Holt and said, can I go out there? I don't know why, but I want to go back out there. And he said, yeah, okay. And he asked Sergeant Adrian Bustinza to go out with him, who'd been a part of Holt's team. So he'd just come back in, and then he says, can I go back out again? And he eventually gets a yes. They go out. Now, we're not quite sure exactly where it takes place. Based on Adrian's description, it's not in the field, but it's close to the field. So there's maybe a pathway close to it. And at the time, there was only a 2-strand small barbed wire that cut off the forest, edge of the forest, to the actual farmer's grass field.
Yeah.
So that was the demarcation, as it were. So somewhere close to the edge of the forest. And what he'll say is that John Burroughs was walking ahead of him, and literally they'd only just gone back out into the forest. So literally 2 or 3 minutes from their perspective, they went out. And then all of a sudden, Sergeant Adrian Bustinza will say that he feels a force as if he's been knocked to the ground from behind, as if somebody's kicked your legs from behind, and you drop to your knees. And as he dropped to his knees, he saw John, who was a few feet ahead of him, being engulfed in an incredible bright white light. And as he's looking forward on his knees, he says, "I see John in the middle." Who, I think John's about 6'6". He's a big guy. You can't miss him. And he said there was John in the middle, incredible bright white light, but on the left there was a figure, a smaller figure on the left side of him, John in the middle. And then he said, I saw another figure on the right side as well when he was engulfed in this bright white light. So it's hard to see. Eventually, that ends, the light goes off, they walk back. Now they think they've only been gone 10 minutes from their perspective. But when they get back to the staging area, Colonel Holt is angry with them. Where have you been? You've been gone 40 minutes. So they were gone 10 minutes, according to them. They have this incredible experience. And when you get back, Holt is saying you've gone 40 minutes. So there's like a missing time, which if anybody's familiar with the abduction side of things, then missing time is one of the regular things that's mentioned, i.e. a time distortion of some discrepancy. Well, here we have what is about 30-40 minutes. So that's an incredible event on its own. But we knew about that. But now we got more details the way Adrian described it. But when I go back to the book, and I guess that's why we're here, there's so many things that are new. For example, Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, we didn't really know what had happened to her on the second night. All right? So if you remember, the first night, if you think about, was Jim Pennison and John Burroughs landed small craft in the clearing. Second night, we didn't really know. We knew something had happened to Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, and she'd been so affected by it, she had to be relieved from duty. But we didn't really know. Well, now we know. An airman that I spoke to called Michael Stacey Smith was a direct witness to part of what happened to her. And this is an incredible story. Cutting a long story short, because I know time's getting on, is that she was effectively ran off a public rural country road by a small UFO, a sphere, that travelled alongside her military vehicle as she's riding between the two bases, riding from RAF Bentwaters along a back country road to RAF Woodbridge. So she's on a public road, and then a UFO, a small sphere, pulls alongside of her at hedgerow height. So imagine you're driving a military vehicle, and then you look out the window and there's an object there. Just following you. She's so frightened, as you would be, that she loses control of the vehicle, and she rolls her vehicle into a ditch on the public road. She clambers out from the rolled vehicle. It's on its side. She clambers out to see that the UFO has stopped. This sphere is just looking down at her from a few feet. It's stopped, and it's looking down at her, and she is so frightened, as you would be, that she picks up her M16 and starts shooting at it. This is all covered up, and it all occurred on a public road. And we didn't know this had happened until Michael Stacey Smith filled in the blanks. And he said he was at RAF Bentwaters, and suddenly he is told to go to the back gate of RAF Bentwaters, which is called Butley Gate. It's like a back entrance onto a little public road. So he opens up the gate, and then he sees a convoy of US Air Force police vehicles going out. He's thinking, where are they going? And he knows something's happening, but there's different radio frequencies. He's not fully aware of what's going on. A few minutes later, he sees one of the vehicles that left in the convoy coming back in, and it's being driven by a sergeant called Robert Ball. Bobby Ball, as he was called, Robert Ball. And as he's driving in, he sees himself as a direct witness that the passenger, the front seat passenger, is none other than Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin. And she's not got a beret, which is what she wore. She's disheveled, she's crying, she's shaking, she's severely traumatized, doesn't speak to her, but clearly sees her. She's driven onto the base. And then a few minutes later, her vehicle that she was driving at the time of this incident was still able to be driven. It's been corrected, put on its wheels, and it's still found to be drivable. And he sees someone, a US Air Force police officer, driving it back onto the base, and he sees that the vehicle has sustained rooftop crumples as if being rolled,
like it's been rolled,
consistent with having been rolled in a ditch.
Yeah.
So he's a direct witness to those two big things. So something had clearly caused damage, and two, she was clearly shaken up by something. Now, he then goes in and speaks to a sergeant who says to him, who he knew well, he says, I'll tell you what happened to her, the other bits, what happened, if you promise me never to reveal my name. And he said, I won't release your name ever. And he hasn't. He's never released it to me either. So he stood by his word, and I respect him for that. But he then got the story, and there's no reason for this guy to make this up. And he tells it in all sincerity, and he said that was the story, that she'd been ran off the road. As she climbed out of the vehicle, the UFO is there just hovering. This may be an object that's maybe 2 or 3 feet across, that's glowing red and glowing, and it's just there, noiseless, just motionless, looking down, hovering close to her. So he admitted that she'd fired a weapon, and this is the interesting part. He said, yeah, we've checked her weapon. She had discharged several rounds, but it's all going to be basically covered up now. We've put those rounds back into the armory, and it's all going to be covered up basically. So can you imagine what a headline that is? And believe it or not, some of the press have been reluctant to talk about that, even though it's direct testimony by a direct witness corroborating other incidents and other people who'd said that she'd gone off. So we had a couple of people who'd heard her over the radio shouting help, 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 but this was obviously after something had happened. And we knew that Robert Ball was the one that got to her first. And now this story is filled in by Michael Stacey Smith, who also in the book is involved in an important sighting of his own. In the run-up to the events, there are 3 prominent, 4 cases now, but there are 3 prominent, what I call precursor cases that occurred in February 1980, July 1980, UFO cases, and November of 1980. So they're important in the book. Whilst some of their information has been known, it's not been widely known, not widely publicized, and it should be, because you're not being given this information by the TV documentaries or other books that are written. So there's that. You've got a massive thing in the sense of a guy called Steve Longero, an airman, who was effectively a new witness, and I interviewed him after he'd done a short interview with a British researcher called Philip Mantle. I went back to Philip and asked him for his contact details. I contacted Steve Longero, and I contacted him because I thought I'll try my advanced interviewing him, see if he'll really concentrate hard and see if he can get any more information. And it worked a treat, and I talked to him for about 3.5 hours on an audio recorded, and he gave me a load of new information, not least the fact that he said he was a direct witness to something that had always been a rumor up till that point. There'd been rumors that a UFO had shone beams down into the nuclear weapons storage area. A WSA as it's called. In the UK, for a bit of extra information, the nuclear weapons storage area is called an SSA, a supplementary storage area. So that's the difference. So in the US, it's just weapons storage area, but it's a nuclear weapons storage area. And he says he was new on shift. He'd only been on the base a few days, and he was put on shift to walk around with an experienced airman inside the nuclear weapons storage area. This is the most guarded place on the entire twin bases. Because it houses nuclear weapons 365 days of the year, 24/7. It's an amazing. I did it for 3 years, so I know exactly what happened. And he's walking around inside the weapons storage area on foot with a senior airman, and he then says he saw a UFO close to the storage area that then shone a beam into the nuclear bunkers. And if you can imagine a long, perhaps 200-meter length of buildings that contain nuclear weapons, it then shone a beam down like a laser beam from the edge of the forest into, I'll do it that way, into the bunkers, and then it went and did this. It did a pendulum, like a grid-like search of the
right.
bunkers, as if to say, what have you got in there? What
Yeah,
have you got in
we
there?
know there's
Yeah,
something in
right,
there.
yeah. And cutting a long story short, it did that, and then the beam went off. The UFO went out towards Rendlesham Forest. Well, his story doesn't end there, and this is when we get into a completely new testimony, because we knew of stories where without a direct witness, we knew that there were stories of beams going at or near into the nuclear weapons storage area, but we didn't have a direct witness. But we knew the story basically. Now he's filled in saying I'm a direct witness, so that's incredible testimony on its own. The press, by the way, are not interested in this. The British press don't seem to be interested in this, which is odd, because they should be, because this is direct corroboration by it's direct witness testimony from a military witness that it happened. It's different from hearsay and saying, well, I believe it happened. No, this is a guy saying I was there, it did happen. So it's not alleged anymore. And so anyway, what happens after the UFO leaves the weapon storage area? It then is heading towards the Rendlesham Forest. And because he's new on shift, and he's basically supernumerary, he's an extra, because he's just literally got there. He don't really know anything, but he's just got there. There's all kind of panics going on in the forest. This is not organized like people portray in the documentaries, where there's a few vehicles pulling up and it's all very organized. It's not. It's chaos, and he describes it as chaos. He's thinking, well, you know, where am I going now? I don't know what's happening. And basically, he's told to get in the back of a truck along with a number of other airmen to go to the forest. He's then taken out to the forest, and this is where it gets interesting, because according to Airman Steve Longero, his account, why should he be lying? He was a 30-year veteran in the military and in police. Excellent record, job-wise, top character. I absolutely back him to the hilt. No reason to lie. He will say that when he got to the staging area, bear in mind every vehicle had to stop because they couldn't go any further, he was then taken on foot to what he said was the first night landing, which he didn't know anything about, but he was taken to a landing site where there were ground impressions. So that infers it's this first night landing. But he said then, while he's there, they have a multiple UFO sighting themselves. And it was witnessed by 10 or 12 officers. Well, nobody knew of this. So entirely new account. So I'm thinking, wow, this is major. And what I'm saying is that this is what you get when you start to ask the right questions and try to set them up right, to say, look, I'm not going to interrupt you. You tell me, just concentrate. It's not hypnosis. You can't do hypnosis over a phone call. But what you can do is you can explain what you're going to try to do and ask them to concentrate. And what you kind of say to them is, you know, however you want to do it, do you want to close your eyes, look at your feet, do whatever's best for you, but concentrate and try to play it back in your mind's eye. And if they're really interested enough and the memory is so ingrained as a stark memory, then they can do that. And Steve Longero and Adrian Bustinza did that. So we got all this new information. And one of the things that I started to say was about why I wrote the book is that I got those interviews in 2018 and 2019, 2020. So in a sense, from my point of view, I'm sat on what is very important Rendlesham Forest new witness testimony, new events, and I can't get it out there because I'm tied to the documentary that basically I have no idea when it's going to end. And I waited 2021, 2022, and then I decided, look, I can't sit on this information any longer. It needs to come out, because this is more important than the documentary. It's more important about the book. It's about getting the facts out there that other things have happened and trying to change this narrative. So that's basically what I did, and put the book out now, and I'm hopeful that the documentary will come out in September, when I'm told it's going to come out, and I hope it does really well. But that was one of the reasons why I brought the book out, because the other thing as well is that when you do the book isn't just new re-interviews. A lot of it The first half of the book is really a deep dive into the history of anything written about it. In policing terms, anything that's written is called documentary evidence, which sounds a bit confusing because you think of documentary films and whatever. But what it means is that if you think of it in a court of law, any receipt, say you were arrested for credit card fraud, any bank transaction document that said on that day and that day you presented that card, and piece of paper will be held up. That's a piece of documentary evidence. It's written down, and you could exhibit that as an exhibit GH1, Gary Heseltine 1. So that kind of thing. Now, I thought I knew the case well because I've been following it a long time. But I thought that if I'm going to get involved in this documentary, I need to be really, really sure about what I'm saying. So I'm going to have to be really accurate. So I thought, well, it's a good opportunity to get your head down and go back to it and see if you can find anything. And when I did and started researching really old UFO publications, and of course things weren't glossy magazines then. There were little publications, little black and white copies, but a lot of them have been digitized and things like that. And asking people for their research that they did many years ago, and they supplied research, things like that. I was able to uncover loads of what I thought really old interviews from the early 80s that basically nobody knows about apart from one or two researchers. And of course, if you think about it in terms of evidence, it's likely to be far more accurate the earlier it is to the incident than all the years down the line, because inevitably you're going to forget things. So when I started to come across interviews that had been done in 1984 and 1985, 1986, I'm thinking, this is brilliant, and I want aware of this. So that's what you get in with the book. So I do it in a very evidential way. I give references so you can look it up. I don't put a reference section at the end, which I was originally going to do. I thought, no, in the modern age of writing a book, you should have it there and then. So you can click on it, what page. If you've got the book, you can go straight to it. You don't have to go to the back. You can put in a YouTube link, and there it is straight away. So validating what I'm saying. So that's what I've done. So it's in your face. When I mention something, there's usually a reference with it where there isn't. And I think that works better. And a lot of people have said it's very analytical that way. A lot of people have said that you can tell you're a detective the way, because not only did I come across these interviews, I would then, some of them would be on audio, some would just be written down. But if they were on audio, I then transcribed them, and they'd never been transcribed basically, or rarely had been written down anyway, or little sections of them. No whole transcripts. So I'd do the transcript, and then I'd take out the relevant bits, and then I'd evaluate what they'd said, what the witness had said. And when you do it that way, you actually realize that there's a lot more information to this case that had actually already been said, but has kind of largely been forgotten about because of the way that certain books have been written about it, where they've just made passing reference to it, or not mentioned at all. And absolutely for certain that the stuff that's in the book, I guarantee you that 50% of it you won't know. Because if I didn't know a lot of stuff, some of the stuff, these interviews, and they contain some really pertinent points, but a lot of the military witness interviews, even down to Sergeant Henry Stinzer, I mentioned again, he then goes on later on in this 4.5-hour transatlantic call to mention about his harsh treatment. He was interrogated. He was a sergeant. He was highly thought of. He'd done well. His career was going well. But after his involvement in this incident, he is taken to an underground facility, and he says it's underground. Larry Warren had said it was underground under the base photo lab. He said I was taken to a deep, dark place underground. And he said he was given like like a spy film interrogation, the hard man treatment, somebody on either shoulder, you sit there, and he was threatened with his life if he did not agree to what they said. And he said, and when you hear him in the book, I've just let him talk here at this point, I'm not interrupting him. I think it's arguably the most powerful passage in the entire book, and it's about a page length. and it's just him describing his interrogation and how it made him feel, and there's no interruptions. And when you read it back, it's almost palpable, and you get really into his mindset. And he said basically that he was so disgusted by the way he was being treated as a sergeant that he wanted to go AWOL afterwards, absent without leave. He wanted to desert. That's what it means, AWOL.
Yeah.
Absent without leave. And he was disgusted, and his life was threatened. Bullets are cheap. His life was threatened. His family were being surveilled in the United States. That's how serious it is. So anybody who still wants lighthouses, well, why would you do that for a lighthouse? Absolutely ridiculous. The lighthouse theory was ridiculous from day one, and the lighthouse theory only exists, and I put it in the book very clearly, only exists and was created entirely by the media, probably at the behest of politicians and the MOD and the US Air Force, the British government, etc. But it was entirely, in my opinion, created as a distraction. And unfortunately, at very high level, I can't prove it, but at very high level, I suspect that top people within the media organizations were pulled in and said, either a D notice, you will not talk about this, or if you talk about it, you ridicule it, which is basically what they did. And have been very effective. And the 50 or 60 English-speaking documentaries that's ever been made still talk about a lighthouse. Well, how can you have a lighthouse that's responsible for 17 different incidents, some of which are on the base, some of which in the opposite direction to where the lighthouse was? Even Colonel Holt said right from the off, it wasn't a lighthouse. Lighthouses don't move. But it was entirely pushed through by the mainstream media, the newspapers. That went the equivalent in the United States. And I think the directive was directed from the US, because this case of multiple nights of UFO activity had the potential in 1980 to be a bit of a game changer. You know, we look at the last few years with the Nimitz incident and the 3 US Navy videos that are now accepted as being real. Things are flying around in the US airspace, and they've been admitted. Well, imagine you had that almost 43 years ago. And can you imagine, would the US Air Force want to admit that the base commander of a nuclear base, top strike base in Britain, was having a silent face-off with some entities from elsewhere? And I think the answer to that would be no. And so everything has been done in the media and at the MOD level and the government level to downplay the significance of what occurred. And even now, when I am sending headlines, sending copies of the book to reporters that I know over the year, they're not interested. Now, what does that tell you? They're not interested. Oh, I'm not doing that. I'm doing something else. But I'm giving you some major headlines, some major breakthrough. No, I'm not doing that anymore. And so that's, not a surprise to me, but it's a disappointment. I've recently, because of the book, and because I announced I'm going to do a special Rendlesham walk based on the book, information showing people locations around on the 19th, 20th of August. It's just a one-off. It'll only not happen again, but it's a unique little tour. And because of that, the papers have latched on to, a Rendlesham Forest tour. And that story has gone round. But only one of the 5 national newspapers that it's appeared in have done the story right about Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin being ridden off the road. The rest have just glossed over it, not stuck to the testimony that I'd given to the reporters. Some of them don't even speak to you. It just goes around like a cycle. Once one story's out, they all steal it from everybody else.
They all jump on it.
Yeah, but they're inaccurate. They give up. One headline's made it sound like that Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin had downed a UFO. Well, I never said downed a UFO, so I had to put a retraction up there straight away on social media. No, I said she shot at it, but the downed UFO, that headline has gone over to India. I've had articles in India. Downed UFO. And you think, Jesus,
around the world.
Well, I never said that. But that's the standard of journalism. But the key thing is, I've said there are lots of new headline stories, and they're not
Yeah.
interested. They're more interested in the tour that I'm going to do. And I'm thinking that don't make sense. If you're really an investigative journalist, you
Yeah.
should want to tell the truth to the public. And the confirmation to me is that they don't want to
No.
tell the truth. They still want to talk about, was it the lighthouse? They
Yeah.
still want to put a skeptical little spin on it, despite the fact
Oh,
that numerous military personnel have gone on the record, spoken to me and spoken to others historically, and say, no, this really incident. When you see it, the way they write it, they go, alleged incident.
yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, if two people are in a field saying that they saw a landed second craft, a second landing, that's not alleged
That's not
anymore.
allowed.
That's two military witnesses who you are basically calling a liar if you call alleged.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. The standard of British journalism is appalling, and I'm sure
Control.
has gone down. And where are the investigative reporters who really want to get to the heart of what's in the book? I wrote to one that I'd had some dealing with in the past, and I said, you might want to serialize the book because it's got a lot of new information, new account, military witness testimony. I said, I'm not doing that anymore. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, you're just going to be given one of the biggest stories in the world on UFOs. It's arguably it's the second most important UFO case in history. That's not me saying that. That's most historical commentators and researchers, because of the number of people involved, because of the different nights. Most UFO incidents are usually one event, one night, or one day, one event. Well, this is not. This is multiple, and it's gone on for several nights. So it's unique, but they're not interested. And you're thinking this, they're still to this day. And like, here's going to be the thing. I'm now going to start going political with it, because I'm going to start going to my MP, and I'm going to give my book to the MP and say, will you read it? And they'll probably say, yeah, but no. But if he doesn't, he can't say that he wasn't given the information when things may emerge down the line. And I'm also involved in other aspects at the very highest level on research with certain people around the world at the very highest levels, and also including, well, I won't go into details, but suffice to say that I'm involved in a project that will bring the subject of UFOs to the United Nations around Christmas time this year, maybe early January, it might be November, December, January.
Yeah.
But I will be going, hopefully, as part of a delegation to the United Nations. It's the first time the subject of UFOs has been brought to the floor of the United Nations since 1978.
Wow.
So I'm there dealing at the highest levels of diplomats and whatever. And here we are. We've got the media. Incredible. The media just treated it like Toy Town. And it's like, they're not bothered. They're not bothered about accuracy. And as you can see, it does make me angry, because it's a frustration. Because in the end, the public are not being given the truth. So when I wrote this book, it was the idea I'd self-published it. I didn't even try to go to a mainstream publisher, because I thought I might get opposition. I wanted to put this out and just slip it under the radar and say, there, it's out there. Yeah, there's some of the reviews. I've maybe had 20 or 30 reviews now. Excellent across the board. That's their words, not mine. But if you want to actually get to the truth, then you've got to go out and read it. And there's lots of politics involved in this. There'll be people that say, no, that's a little rubbish, blah, blah, blah. Make your own mind up. What I'm telling you is there's a lot of information there. Read the words of the reviewers, the professional reviewers, the researchers. Read the foreword, and you base it on that. And everyone that's read the book as a decent human person, being researchers, come back and said it's excellent. That's their words, not mine. So if you really want to know what happened at Rendlesham Forest, you're getting it now in a very stylized detective written story. It's very analytical. I evaluate interviews. I say, well, what are the key points to emerge out of that, and then move on. And that's what I do throughout all of the book. And then it leads to a conclusion, which is literally 17 different events in and around the bases in late December, which is amazing. And let me just give you another little exciting thing that we didn't know about. On the 23rd of December, so this is not after Christmas Day, this is an incident that's occurred allegedly, and it's allegedly because the witness believes that it was, he can't say for certain, it's all the years down, but it's a military witness.
Yeah.
Basically, he will say that he was called to an incident by what's called the East Gate of RAF Woodbridge, which is involved in a lot of the sightings. It's heavily mentioned. Yeah. And he goes to this East Gate, and for whatever reason, he says that there was a US Air Force security police officer on duty there. Now, that's odd in itself, because routinely that gate wasn't manned, apart from when they were on exercise or on an alert. Maybe that gives you a story. Maybe they're on alert. But he will say that they spoke to the US Air Force security guard, and he basically was very upset and had said something landed in some trees nearby, just outside the perimeter of the base, literally from the gate 150 meters away from the base, which is really close. And he said it went dropped behind some trees. Anyway, he'd already had a sighting earlier on in the year, one of these three pre-events in February, July, and November of 1980. And when he had his sighting, he didn't. He mentioned it publicly to his bosses, and he basically got, "We're not interested. Don't you say anything. Keep quiet." And he basically got told off for just telling the truth. So he thought, if he sees any other UFO, he's not going to report it because he doesn't want a hard time again, understandably.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, on this incident, he's called to the East Gate, and the airman is upset at the East Gate, and he says, "Something landed over there." But they don't see anything in terms of where they are when they're talking to him, but they said, "Oh, we'll go over a look." Anyway, they go to the trees, and they go inside, and they find a little clearing. And in the clearing, they come across three triangular, a triangular formation, equilateral triangle of indentations, as if something has landed like a landing gear on a triangular landing gear. But here's the thing. This guy says that the depressions were 5 feet or so wide. Now, if you think of the original landing craft, the indentations from the first night, they were only about 8 to 10 inches wide. Right. So here we have depressions from an alleged craft that was seen by a military witness to land behind some trees, and they've come across physical evidence, i.e. ground impressions, in a perfect triangle, each with depressions in the ground and soil approximately 5 feet wide, inferring a much bigger craft. Now, that story has never come to light before. But see what I mean? So there's all of these things. I could go on, but suffice to say, and let me just give you one quick one before we go, and it's a good one. We talk about that landing in the field that's now corroborated by Sergeant Adrian Bustinza. So cameras there, it's being filmed, base commander there, security officers surrounding it. That's the scenario. Well, when Colonel Holt, before he retired, he was rang up one day. He didn't retire until 1991. He was called on the telephone by a MUFON researcher called Ray Boucher in April 1985. And by then, Ray Boucher and his colleague Scott Colburn had been doing some research on Rendlesham, and they'd done some brilliant work. They'd interviewed a lot of the people. They'd interviewed Adrian Bustinza. They'd interviewed Larry Warren, blah, blah, blah. And they'd built up an idea of what had occurred.
Yeah.
And when it came to this second landing, he rings Holt up, having never had a conversation with him before. And he said, "Colonel," it was then a Lieutenant Colonel, "I am Ray Boucher. I'm a MUFON investigator investigating Rendlesham Forest. I've spoken to a number of military witnesses, and they basically said there was a second landing. It was in a field. It was surrounded by security police officers. It was being filmed on movie cameras. The base commander was there, and there were possibly entities seen." And to that, he wrote Holt's verbatim reply, which basically, to paraphrase, was, I can verify all of that for the senator. And he was referring to a senator called James Exxon. But he said, I can verify all of that. So what he does is he sets all the circumstances out of this second landing, and then Holt basically says, yeah, I can verify that. And he was verifying that Colonel Williams was there and that moving images of the craft on the ground were taken.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as Holt retires, oh, that never happened. I never said that to Ray Boucher, says Holt. I didn't know this at the time, but when I saw that admission is valid. It's absolutely genuine. It was 6 years before he retired, before he became a public figure on all of this and all documentaries, a TV personality, for want of a better word. So this is a raw admission that he made to a MUFON researcher. And let's put it into context. He can't say that it's ambiguous, because Ray Boucher to Senator Exxon, who related to this admission, because he lived in Nebraska, and he'd gone to his Nebraska senator called Senator James Exxon and said, look, this case involves American airmen, you should get interested. James Exxon, the senator, was part of the Armed Services Committee, so he'd done all this. He'd got this admission effectively for Exxon. Well, strangely, Holt then meets Senator Exxon, and after that, Exxon didn't want to know Ray Boucher, didn't want to know, and he wouldn't answer any phone calls, so he'd been warded off, but that admission was still valid. And so what Ray Boucher did, he wrote letter after letter to Senator Exxon saying, look, I've spoken to Holt, he said this, he wrote it verbatim, it was being filmed, base commander there, and he admitted all of that, and it was being filmed. And so the letters proved that it wasn't ambiguous, that it was a very organized, here's a scenario, this is what happened, and this is what he was admitting to. So it's an absolutely bona fide, in my opinion, a bona fide admission made in 1985, 6 years before he referred to, and he's since denied ever since. To my mind, there's something wrong there.
Yeah, definitely. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
So it makes now the corroborated testimony by Sergeant Arian and Bustinza that bit more watertight, doesn't it? Because Holt was saying originally that did happen, and the base commander was there, and it was being filmed, and there were other security police officers there. Denied it ever since. So all that kind of stuff you'll learn in the book. But there's a wealth of old material in terms of old interviews, and there's a lot of new re-interviews and some new testimony as well.
Excellent.
So you make of it what you will, but I'm flattered if you want to do a review on it. You say whatever you want to say. You say whatever you want.
I'll be nice.
No. It's not about being nice. It's about
I'll be. If there's any criticism, it'll be constructive. So, like I'd expect on here.
Absolutely. But you do that. You say whatever you want. Be constructive, whatever you want, but just tell the truth. That's all.
Oh,
yeah.
Tell the truth. Promise. Right. Can we one question just before you go?
Yeah.
So this is from UFO Joe, and he wants to know any information on the red ball behave. Oh, any information on how the red ball behaved after the shots were fired?
Is it UFO Joe that does the podcast?
I don't think it is. No, this is a different one.
All right. Okay, a different one. But if it is, contact me at heseltine@hotmail.com, and we'll have a private discussion. But suffice to say is that when Bonnie Tamplin sees the red glowing object, she shoots at it with her M16. I think that's what prompts, as far as we're aware, that's when the UFO shoots away at speed. So that's in a sense the end of it when she shoots at it. But can you imagine what a terrifying thing that would have been for anybody? And no wonder that she shot at it. But that story should be a front page story for me on National Headline. It should be on the 6 o'clock news, because there you've got genuine testimony, partial corroborated testimony of a woman being run off the road by a UFO on British public roads, and people still want to talk about lighthouse. That's the conundrum.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It doesn't add up, does it?
No.
No.
So that's why the book's been written. That's why it's self-published. So I could get it out under the radar, get it out before somebody tried to stop me.
Yep. No, it's all good. And I promise I will be buying this book next week, and we'll be doing a review. I think it probably be the second book that we do a review on.
Whatever you want to do, as and when.
Well, I'll contact you before and let you know when we're going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
I appreciate you letting me come and spend a couple of hours talking about the book, because I'm trying to reach as many people as I can to say, look, this is out there. If you really want to know what's occurred, you're not going to get this in a TV documentary. You're not going to get this in the newspapers, though nobody will be accurate. You're not going to get it from the people who control the narrative of this case. But
no.
this way you can see it and look at it and then make your own assessment.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you coming on. And
You're welcome.
you've made it a lot easier for me by you keep talking.
I'm not shy in retiring, as you've probably gathered.
Yeah, no, it makes it better for me, and it's just so interesting because I've learned
there's so much other stuff I could mention, but they're literally in the time.
Yeah, because
well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, because just going to say, Rendlesham's one of my favourite cases, but with everything you've said, it opens up more and more.
Absolutely, there's so much more to it.
Yeah, because where I work, I drive around Rendlesham quite a lot. I go past Woodbridge and down towards Felixstowe, all around that area, and I didn't even realise how close Rendlesham was to the coast.
Oh, it's right next to it.
Yeah, it is literally less than a mile.
Yeah. If you look at aerial shots that we've got taken with drones, you can see the sea in the background. That's how close it is.
Yeah, because like I said, I didn't realise how close it was, and then I went. Is it Shingle Street?
Yeah. I believe so.
Because I delivered to some of the beach houses down there, and it's like, oh, it's literally at the side of Rendlesham, like next to the coast. So, that was another thing that surprised me, because then if there was anything coming in, obviously it can come in from the ocean or the seas or whatever.
Well, if you think about the red light that came over the mist, that came from the direction of the sea. Not quite sure if that's relevant. But just one thing before we go about the tour. This is just going to be a one-off tour. There's 25 places. It's virtually sold out on the Saturday. I think there's 4 places left on the Saturday and there's about 10 tickets left on the Sunday. 19th and 20th. It's a unique tour because it's going to be based on everything that's new in the book, along with some of the existing information. And nobody's ever done this tour that's basically said, that happened there, that happened there, that happened there. This is the closest you're going to come to somebody that really knows the case intimately, who can show you this. Yeah.
No, appreciate it. I've just been told to let you know that when I find it, tell Gary he's making some sales tonight, and thank you, and that's from Nickname.
Well, in the end, I might want to. I want to see if I can get a mainstream publisher, because in the end, I'm just one person, and I'm reliant on people like yourself to do self-publishing. Whereas if it'd gone through a publishing house, they'd be distributing it to all countries, languages, and whatever. So it potentially could be a bestseller. But what I'm doing is I'm gathering all the reviews that I'm getting from researchers, particularly big top people, and then I can then maybe go to one of theirs and say, look, you've got a potential.
This is what I've done. This is what I've got.
Please read it, see what you think. But at the moment, the idea was to just get it under the radar. I put it out, I slipped it out. There was no pre-publicity whatsoever, and that was entirely meant because I wanted to get the story out there.
Yeah, because if you'd have started telling everyone, then that you're going to have, no, don't do it. Oh, you should do this. Leave it. Oh, we'll do this for you. And
absolutely.
The list goes on.
So I kind of know how this subject works, and there was such good information. I think the public should know this, and I also want to try to help the other airmen, the other witnesses who are in my book, to get a voice and to appear in documentaries, because they don't go looking and it's wrong. The narrative, the existing narrative, is completely wrong, and it's been controlled for the last 25 years, in my opinion, deliberately to control how it's perceived in the public. There's a chance to change it. It can only do it with more shows like this, by getting the word out.
Yeah. No, right. Well, thank you for coming on. I know that you've got to shoot off, and that's why we ended up doing the stream earlier. Just massive thank you for coming on. Thank you for everyone in the chat. Everyone listening. Thanks again to everyone who's going to listen on podcast. Make sure you go out and buy the book. I will put it up again. It is called Non-Human, The Rendlesham Forest UFO Incident, 40 Years of Denial by Gary Heseltine.
42 years.
Yeah.
You said 40.
Oh, did I? Oh, sorry.
42.
Trying to read quicker than I can. Yeah, so 42 years. So, yeah, go out and get it. So I shall let you go because I know you've literally got to go within seconds, haven't you?
Yep. I appreciate it. And if you want to invite me back at any time, you've only got to ask. I've enjoyed the show. Thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent. No, I'll keep in touch.
Yep.
If you want to shoot off, I'll finish off because I'll update with who's coming on Friday. Hope everything goes well with the tour and the book, and hopefully I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks very much.
All right.
Much appreciated,
Cheers,
Andy. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers, mate. I'll speak to you soon. Take care. See you later. Right. Thank you, everyone. Sorry. So sorry. I didn't get a chance to ask any questions, but as you can see, he likes to talk. So I am going to, if you bear with me, I'm going to take photos of the questions. And I will get him to come back on, hopefully before, the end of the year. So I really do apologise that I didn't get to ask him anything. Also on Friday, we've got BMR Rob. So Bigfoot Michigan Rob, he's coming on Friday. Next Wednesday, we've got Barry Littleton coming on his own. And then, I don't know after that, but I'll keep you updated with everything. Oh, then Chris Reinhardt, I'm going to be speaking to him on Thursday just to confirm that he's coming on the 5th. And then, yeah, just go from there. So I shall see, hopefully, you guys in the next 2 days. Thank you, everyone, that have just subscribed and joined. Sorry I didn't get to say hello to everyone, but it's just really busy tonight. And everyone that downloads a podcast, you can find it on anything, YouTube, not YouTube, Spotify, Deezer, Apple, all the podcast players. It's run off Podbean. So, and that's it. So have a great night and speak to you all later. Take care and goodbye.